Let's take a look at the story and where it falls in the timeline of history, because I think that can tell us a little something too. So I'm getting nerdy and old school here. I have my whiteboard. Can y'all tell that sometimes I teach? So I don't know about you, but the names and places in the Bible start to turn to mush in my brain unless I have a visual. And my kids have memorized this timeline song that puts biblical events in the order of historical things that are happening at the same time. And that gives us kind of a broader picture that helps us out. So some of you may even be familiar with this song. We're going to start at 1000 BC, and I'm probably not going to sing it. I'll chant it because I can't sing. Okay, so 1000 BC, early Native Americans, Israel divides into two kingdoms, Homer and Hesiod. Rome is founded by Romulus and Remus. Then Israel falls to Assyria, these bad dudes. And then Assyria falls to Babylon. Judah falls to Babylon, and the temple is destroyed. And then Babylon falls to Persia. The Jews return and rebuild the temple, right? Roman Republic. Okay, we'll stop there. All right, so we have some maps, I think. Do we have that, Danny? Is it working? Israel divided. Okay, this is Israel divides. The upper part remained Israel. The lower part becomes known as Judah. And then the upper part is defeated by the Assyrians, these bad dudes who are like taking over everyone in the area. And then Assyria is taken over by Babylon. They defeat them. Eventually, Babylon also defeats Judah, so they've taken over all of Israel. And then they exile their people. They take their people to Babylon. The book of Daniel tells us all about this that's taking place. And then all of Babylon is defeated eventually by the Persian Empire. And we have a map of that too. The Persian Empire at this time is massive. It just spans all the way from India to Kush along the Nile River, this huge portion of land. But something really cool happens when the Persians are in control. There's a king named King Cyrus the Great. And King Cyrus eventually decides to let the Jews go. They've been in captivity for about 70 years. And the book of Nehemiah tells us about some of this. They let the Jews go. They're allowed to travel back to their temple in Jerusalem that had been destroyed. And he gives them everything they need to begin rebuilding that temple, to reclaim who they are as a people. All right? But then many generations pass from King Cyrus, who let the Jews go home to rebuild their temple, to where we are in Esther today. So I think we have kind of a timeline of the kings as well. And it goes from King Cyrus, and then there's several generations of kings until we get to, if you see Xerxes the first in green, Cyrus is way over there in blue. That's where we are in the book of Esther today. King Xerxes is the king. So several generations of kings. So my question is, why in the book of Esther are we still talking about Jews in Persia? Why are we talking about Jews in the city of Susa, the capital of Persia, which is today it's Iran? We know that they had been released and told that they could go home. But by this point in history, I think many Jews were so assimilated into the Persian culture, meaning they spoke like a Persian, they dressed like a Persian, they ate like a Persian. A person wouldn't be able to tell if they were a Jew unless they told them so. So the Jews, as an entire people, had been silenced. We know that even when the Babylonians had control and had taken Daniel in, they did everything they could to train the Jewishness out of these people, right? They changed their names. They made them eat different food. They made them wear different clothes. They were just stripping them of their identity as a people, and they had been silenced. They wanted them to act like the Babylonians and then the Persians. It was the same thing. So as a whole people, they had been silenced. And I can only imagine that those who chose to stay in Susa chose to remain in silence about their culture, about their God, because living in silence was the only safe way to exist there. It was their new normal. They willingly surrendered their freedom as a people and a culture to submit to the authority of the Persian Empire and its king. But if there's one thing that I've learned about our God, if you ever find yourself in a place where you have forgotten who you truly are and you have been silenced, God will find a way to remind you who you are, who He is, and the purpose He has for your life. He never intends for us to be silenced. He's about to very clearly remind Esther, and you'll hear about Mordecai. He's going to remind them who they are, who He is, and show them a purpose that He has for them. And you'll see in this story, there'll come a time when they have to choose between silence or speaking up. So how good are you at speaking up? We are definitely well assimilated as Christians in the United States. For the most part, we dress like everyone else. We eat like everyone else. We speak like everyone. We do a lot of the same things as everyone else. No one is going to know that you're a Christian unless you tell them or you show them by your actions. Sometimes I'm good at that, and sometimes I'm not. When I was in junior high, I rode the bus to school with my neighbor and friend. Her name was Elena. Elena was a super sweet girl who had Down syndrome, and it was my job to make sure that no one messed with her while we rode the bus to school. And I had to make her feel welcome and encouraged and included as we rode to and from school. I got to do that. If anyone tried to make fun of her, and sometimes they did, then I spoke up and I shut it down, and I made sure that I stood up for my friend. I did okay in that instance. But there were other times when I failed to speak up. In high school, there was a new kid who moved to town, and immediately he made an impression on everyone as the kid you don't want to mess with. He was an angry person. He would get in trouble all the time. He was picking fights everywhere he went. He was just like a bad dude. And rumors spread that he was a drug dealer and that he brought a gun to school and that he was a part of a gang, which was like ridiculous because I grew up in this small town in Missouri and there are no gangs there. But eventually he started dating one of the girls in school, and it wasn't long before she was pregnant. And I remember it was my junior year and I couldn't drive yet. So I always rode to school with my older brother, and I was waiting for him to finish something that day. I was sitting in the cafeteria. It's near the school exit. I was by myself until this girl and this boy start walking down the hall toward me. The girl was very pregnant at this time. She was carrying a stack of school books, but it was obvious that the two of them were fighting. And I was trying to be invisible in my chair in the corner as they got closer, and eventually they were standing fairly close to me, and he is just yelling at her and cursing at her. And then he balls up his fist and he smashes them down on the books that she's carrying, knocks them on the floor, and he storms out of the doors. And she starts sobbing as she's picking up her books to leave. And guess what I did? Nothing. I sat there frozen in my chair, and I watched everything that happened. And I can't tell you how many times I've wished that I could go back and be braver. I was so mad at myself that I didn't stand up or speak up and tell him to stop, or at least go over and comfort her after he left and help her pick up her books. But I did nothing. Sometimes choosing to speak up is harder than we think, right? We always imagine ourselves the brave hero in the story, but when given the chance to live that out, sometimes we remain silent. Well, Esther and Mordecai are about to teach us all about speaking up. The book of Esther opens by introducing us to King Xerxes, the king of that Persian empire we showed you. And we find him in the midst of a 7-day party as he celebrates all that his armies have accomplished. He's thrown open the doors to his lavish kingdom and invited all the rulers of the surrounding nations, and the wine is freely flowing. And by the 7th day of his drunk fest, it describes that the king is in high spirits, and he calls for his beautiful wife, Queen Vashti. And he asks her to come make an appearance at the party because he wants to show her off to the crowd. And King Xerxes is doing the best he can with these guys to prove his power. And he wants to show how great he is and how much worth and value that he has, and that everyone has to do what he asks because he's the king, even his trophy wife. But this is greatly challenged in an embarrassing way when Queen Vashti refuses to come to the party. She does speak up, and she boldly denies his request, and this infuriates King Xerxes. So he consults his experts and wise men about what to do, and they fear that if word gets out that the queen is disobeying the king, then all women everywhere across the land will begin disrespecting their husbands, and there will be wild rebellion on their hands. So they give the king this advice. In Esther 1:17 through 22, it says, "Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. And then, when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest." And the king agreed with the advice, so he signs the law, sends out the decree, and kicks Vashti out of the kingdom. Ah, yes. This is an excellent way to earn respect, guys, right? Lay down the law. Well, the first lesson is that this is not a good way to earn a woman's respect. Demanding your wife to be silent and obey because the law says so will not win her respect. The Lord knows this, and he teaches a much better and more excellent way in Ephesians 5. He speaks about husbands and wives submitting to one another, and it speaks about wives respecting their husbands. But this is how the husbands are to earn the respect of their wives. He says in Ephesians 5:25, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." So, guys, if the things you are speaking up about in life result in silencing others, then your words are probably not from Christ. Throughout Scripture, Christ lifts others up. He gives them more dignity. He listens and encourages them to speak up. But this is the environment that Esther and all of the women in the Persian Empire live in. Xerxes does all that these men suggest, and later, when he has sobered up and has simmered down a bit, he misses Vashti. Oh, poor King Xerxes. Once again, his wise men come up with a plan, and they suggest the king should host a giant beauty contest with virgins from all over the provinces in order to find his new wife. So in Esther 2:4, it says, "This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it." I bet it did. So next we are introduced to Mordecai and Hadassah, who's also known as Esther. So in Esther 2:5-7, it says, "Now there was a citadel in Susa, a Jew whose name was Mordecai. He had been taken into exile from Jerusalem, whom King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled. And Mordecai was bringing up Hadassah, also known as Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. And now the young lady was beautiful of form and face. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter." Esther, being the beauty that she was, is one of the girls chosen to go to the palace. And Mordecai, who's been caring for her, is described as pacing back and forth in the palace court every day because he wants to know how Esther's doing and what's going on with her. And I love this because I think it shows his true compassion for her. But once again, Esther is silenced. In Esther 2:10-11, it says, "Esther did not make known to her people or her kind, for Mordecai had instructed her that she should not make them known. Every day, Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. Mordecai probably tells her to keep her heritage quiet, not to tell anyone she's a Jew for her own safety because they were kind of looked down upon. And she's told to keep the fact that she's a Jew a complete secret. So the passage talks about Esther immediately winning the favor of everyone she meets in the palace. She ultimately wins the favor of the king as well and is eventually crowned queen. And that all sounds kind of wonderful, but let's set the scene a little bit more clearly. This is kind of like a royal version of The Bachelor, except for one key component. What is different? What's different is these girls did not choose to go. They were chosen by the king's men and they were taken. So do you think that they had the right to refuse the king when he was telling them to come to the palace? No. And knowing the king's character and how he treated his previous queen Vashti, do you think they were excited about possibly being King Xerxes' wife? These girls were ripped from their friends, their families, their homes, everything they know, and they're locked up in the palace together. They're about to be paraded around in front of the king so he can judge them solely on their outward appearance. And the prize for winning this contest is marrying someone they don't know or love, and so he can treat them like a trophy until he tires of them and chooses to discard them like his previous wife. At any moment, he could have them exiled or killed if they upset him or displease him in any way. Does this sound like a fairy tale to you? Yeah. No? Okay. Not exactly Cinderella and Prince Charming, right? So it's starting to sound a little bit more like the movie Taken than The Bachelor. But these girls were not given a choice. Their opinion was never asked of them. They were silenced. So let's read some of these responses that you gave me. The things that you would like to have a choice in. You don't want someone telling you what to do. Marriage, college, what starter Pokemon to choose. Okay. What you get to do as a job, who you marry, when I wake up in the morning, yes. Whether you eat Cane's or Chick-fil-A. Yeah. Who your girlfriend is, how much cheese I can eat. All right. Let's see. What you wear, for sure. What you name your kid, yes. Okay. Whether or not you get drafted into World War III. Okay. I like that. Yeah. But a lot of you said who you marry, who you date. That was probably the most common response. There are some things in life that we like to have a say in, right? We want to have a say in important things like who we marry. But it says Esther won everyone's favor. What do you think she did to win everyone's favor? She did what she was told. She gave no opinions of her own, and everyone liked her. The rule with this contest was that when the girls were finished with their year-long beauty treatments and they were finally called to go in to see the king, they would be given anything they asked for to wear or to take with them. But in Esther 2:15 it says, "Now when the turn of Esther came to go in to the king, she did not request anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her." Sometimes it seems easiest for us to stay quiet and not rock the boat and win everyone's favor by doing so. And she does win the favor of the king in the end, and is not only crowned queen, but the king declares a holiday in her honor. It seems like she's being greatly honored and rewarded for her silence. But little does the king know that God is about to do some powerful things to institute a far greater holiday in remembrance of Mordecai and Esther that's still celebrated by the Jews today, not for her silence, but for the way she spoke up. So here's a side story taking place outside of the palace walls. First, we see Mordecai, the guy who's been raising her and taking care of her. He does another noble thing. He hears about a plot to kill the king and he reports it. The criminals are hanged on the gallows. It's recorded in the king's books, and that's it. Mordecai doesn't even get a thank you. In chapter 3, we're introduced to this super Weasley guy named Haman. And for some reason, after Mordecai stops this assassination attempt, Haman is the one elevated to a seat of honor above all the other royals. And the king sends out a command that everyone must kneel in Haman's presence. But Mordecai refuses to do so. He's not about to break the first commandment by bowing down before someone other than the Lord. And he literally takes a stand as Haman walks by. And this makes Haman so angry that he doesn't just want to have Mordecai killed, but he wants to kill every single Jewish man, woman, or child in the entire kingdom. Haman's pride was hurt, and he is bloodthirsty. So another lesson for you guys, when you do not find your identity in Christ, you might find that you become power hungry. And this is an example of someone trying to silence others in order to prove his own strength. And that's the opposite of being Christ-like. Christ always serves instead of silencing others. Silencing others is not a strength or a healthy way of speaking up. So like Haman and King Xerxes, when you become too caught up in what other people think of you, it can make you do horrible things. When you have to step on other people in order to elevate yourself, there is a serious heart issue, right? So Haman casts what he calls a lot, like these things they throw to help them decide something. It's called a pur, to decide a date. And he declares that on that date, all Jews will be slaughtered. And he is for sure speaking up, but he's speaking up in order to silence the innocent. And he takes the idea to Xerxes, and the king agrees. The edict is declared through all the land, and the Jewish people are devastated. They tear their clothes, they weep, they wail. They're wearing sackcloth and ashes, and including Mordecai, who weeps bitterly at the king's gate. I'm sure he felt like the consequence of his standing up was going to be the devastation of all the Jewish people. And meanwhile, Esther is sitting pretty up in the palace, and she's clueless. She hasn't heard any of the horrible news. Her servants tell her that they see Mordecai in sackcloth and mourning at the gate. So Esther sends him clothes to put on, like, change your clothes. What are you doing? But he refuses them. And he sends a message back with her servants about the awful edict and asks Esther to beg the king for mercy. Some people think it's kind of cruel or cowardly that Mordecai put Esther in this dangerous position of confronting the king. But surely he knows that she could die if the king doesn't like what she says. Her reply to Mordecai is this, Esther 4:11 says, "All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman comes to the king in the inner court who's not been summoned or called, he has one law, that person be put to death, unless the king holds out the golden scepter so that the person may live. But I have not been summoned to come to the king for 30 days. Mordecai certainly doesn't approach the king himself because he doesn't have enough maybe political power to secure a meeting with the king, especially if others know he's a Jew and if that Haman guy already hates him. But he knows that Esther has a position of power. And I think the way he speaks to Esther next is quite noble. Mordecai responds with these words, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this." And I love this for these reasons. He warns her of the danger that could come. He's being protective of her again. He reminds her who she is, that she's been silent all along, but she is a Jew. And secondly, he reminds her who God is, that he has no doubt the Jews will be delivered somehow, but it may mean that her family will die first. And third, he reminds her that God has a purpose for her. She does have a voice. She does have a position of influence. And God has a plan for her. He can use her words for good. So Mordecai's speaking up encourages her to come out of her silence and speak up as well. Esther takes this encouragement and she immediately begins speaking up. She responds to the difficult situation and starts instructing others what to do next. So in Esther 4:16 it says, "Go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink anything for 3 days, night or day, and my maidens will also fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law." So she knows that things will always go better for you when you consult God. So the first thing when she starts speaking up, she does is to point people to God. She tells them, seek God's face. And then Esther utters these words that will ring powerful for all history. In Esther 4:16, she says, "If I die, I die." But she's going to do what she knows is right. Wow. Think about the weight of those words for a moment. Can you say that? Could you stand up like that if needed? Or would you be frozen in fear like I was in the school cafeteria? I don't think a single one of us has ever been called upon to speak up in such a way that we risk our lives for others. But could we? I have trouble speaking at Frankie, yes. I have trouble speaking up about much smaller things for God, but how about you? When faced with difficult decisions at school or work, are you able to say, if I'm embarrassed, I'm embarrassed? Or if I lose a friend, I lose a friend. If I lose my job, I lose my job. If I lose my boyfriend or girlfriend, then I lose them. Sometimes even smaller things than that are hard for us to sacrifice. If I have to give up my money or my time or my comfort, are we willing to do the right thing? Are you willing to trade your silence for speaking up if it means giving something up for God? How are we willing to speak up for God? Are we allowing him to use us for his purpose? The next part of the story is pretty funny because Esther speaks up before the king, and Haman, that Weasley man, Mordecai refused to bow before, who had planned to kill the Jews, falls from power, and he receives the punishment that he had planned for Mordecai, and Mordecai receives the honor and power that Haman so desperately wanted for himself. It's awesome. So the rest of the story tells how Esther's bravery saves thousands, if not millions, of lives and brings honor to the Jews. And ultimately, a holiday called Purim was instituted to commemorate all of these events, and it's still celebrated today. Every time the Jews celebrate Purim, they're reminded of who they are, who God is, and that he has a purpose for them. And it's all because one little Jewish girl who'd been exiled and orphaned and taken and stripped of any choice and treated like property and silenced, decided to call upon the power of God and risk her life in order to speak up and save others. So maybe we all need a moment of Purim in our lives. Don't be like Xerxes and Haman who go around silencing others to lift themselves high. Be like Mordecai and Esther. Encourage others to speak. Speak up yourselves in obedience to God, no matter what you might be risking. You are God's. God is good, and he has created all of you for such a time as this.